So as promised, I wanted to do a really quick comparison of these two watches. In my right hand, I have the Seestern. This is their Monster Homage. It's in all black PVD coating, and then you have a fully loomed dial. In my left hand, I have the Monster. This is called the Frost Monster from Seiko, and this is actually lent to the channel from Rock the Watch, very good friend of the channel, and this is his personal watch. He bought this well after this had sold out, and this has been sold out for a few years now. I believe this was a Japanese domestic only model, and he paid around $1,500 for this watch. This is the SBDC073. It does have a 6-arm movement, so it's a slightly higher end version of the Monster because you do get that 6-arm movement. It does, however, get a hardlex, so this does have a hardlex crystal. So I just want to do a quick comparison. I'll do some measurements of the Seestern and the Seiko just so that we know them, and I'll talk about specs. Both of these are 200 meters dive watches. They both have ratcheting bezels. Both of them have very similar indices, very similar even chapter rings. Even the handsets are very similar. Obviously, the cases also very similar. You sort of get that shrouded, and then, of course, those sort of divots in the case and in the crown. Very, very similar watches. We'll do measurements in just a second, like I just said. However, there is a little bit of a difference in the lug width and the thickness of the lugs, if you could see that. So it's not an exact copy of the Monster, and I'm going to do measurements just to prove that, but I believe visually that's what it looks like. Like I said, this has an NH35 or an NH36, which is essentially a 4-arm movement. So if you were going to go and buy a Monster right now, you would probably buy something like the SRPD25, which is the sort of upgraded Monster. It does get a 4R36, I want to say. It has a day and date, just like the Seestern. Here you're only getting the day with that the date, excuse me, with that magnifier. And you would pay around $525 if you buy it directly from Seiko, but really, who does that these days? You always get a discount on them, so you're probably going to spend around $400, let's say. You could probably even get it cheaper than that. However, the Seestern is a lot cheaper than that, and the Seestern comes in at $179, I think it is, so under $200. You're getting the same movement, but you are getting a sapphire crystal without that candy bar magnifier on the dial. Plus, this is fully loomed, and you're getting very similar bracelets. So this is basically the same bracelet that you would get on that SRPD that you get on this right here, the SBDC, and it's very obvious that Seestern basically copied the bracelet one for one. You could see that the links are very similar. I'm not sure if you could actually swap them out. They do look a little bit wider on the Seiko than they do on the Seestern, and you get a different buckle. Obviously, there is a really crappy diver's extension on here, but if you are a diver and you want to use it, it's there, which is nice. There is less micro adjust on the Seestern because you're only getting 3 positions. It's a very small buckle on here, and here you're getting 4 positions. There is a difference in the buckle that's more major, I would say. There is a double push, just like the Seestern as well, except the buckle basically is all pressed. So the scissor is pressed, this is pressed, and also you have a diver's extension, which is pressed. Whereas on the Seestern, that is not pressed. It is signed, obviously, but you're getting a milled buckle. And this portion actually, I believe, might be pressed. However, it feels a little bit more substantial than the Seiko's, which is odd. And then, of course, the case backs. You have a slightly nicer case back on the Seestern. When we're talking about case backs in general, that's not really the biggest deal, but obviously the Seiko would have the typical Seiko wave pattern on here. It looks like every Seiko that you've ever seen. Nothing too crazy, and they never really put anything too crazy on their case backs. But the Seestern, it's a little bit nicer. It's a little bit more deeply etched. I'll put pictures of that up. Let's listen to the bezel action. I'm going to listen to the bezel action on the Seiko first. And I usually like the bezel actions on Seiko, so let's listen to that. So it's tight, but it's not too tight. It sounds good but it's not very loud. It feels nice. It's just not very audible. It's more muted clicks than anything else. It doesn't move. It really sits very well. Everything lines up on this watch, which is kind of a rarity for a Seiko, but that's good. And then let's listen to the Seestern. Very, very, very similar action. Everything lines up. There is no movement in the bezel. It's a little bit more audible, but not incredibly more audible. So it's sort of a match to the Seiko, maybe a little bit better in the sound, but the feel is almost identical, which is a good thing. So let's do measurements as I had promised. So this does get a 4R36, essentially an NH36 in here. This gets a 6R15, so this does have a higher grade movement, but they no longer make this movement. They no longer make this watch, so you really can't even get that. So 41.1 millimeters is what I'm measuring on the Seestern. Said it's 41.5. They measure around that 41 to 42 millimeter range. So actually it's in the notch here. Let's get it on there. So 42.5 if you get the notches, and then I think I had gotten that correct on here, but let's try it again. So 42 basically if you're measuring on one of the areas that is not notched out. So there you go. Thickness on the Seestern 13.5. Thickness on the Seiko 13. So thinner because the 6R15 is basically the exact same movement. It's just slightly more upgraded. I think the reason why this is thicker because you have a bigger case back on here. That's the reason why here. So that's a win for Seiko definitely, because we want thinner watches. And then of course the crown on the Seestern 6.7 millimeters. I think you actually get a bigger crown on the Seiko, I want to say, but let's check that out. 6.7, so it's basically 1 for 1. And there you go. I mean, there's really not that many differences between these two watches. In hand, this is a little bit lighter, and I think that's because of two reasons. Number one, there are links that are off of this watch. There are no links off of this watch yet, but it's still not that. There's a big difference between the two. I think because of the case back, this feels like a bigger case back. It's a little bit thicker, and I also I think that the buckle obviously weighs more than the buckle on this one, on the Seiko. So that's the reason why this actually feels heavier, and it is heavier. It just feels heavier. Let me measure the lug span as well, by the way. Not the lug span, the lug to lug, because the lug to lug looks different on these watches, and I wonder if they are. 48.5, that's at the lugs on this watch on the Seestern, and then on the Seiko, so 47.8. So that is weird. So this actually has a slightly, so we just measured 47.8, 47.6. So it's basically the same. It's basically the same. I don't remember what I got the first time doing it, but that's the lug. I got it on the lugs, 47.7. So they're basically, I mean, really, they're milled to basically the exact same specifications. They're very, very close, except this is a little bit thicker, and I'm not sure if that's because of the movement. I don't think that the 6R is thinner in any way. It could be just because of the case back. The way the case back is designed on the Seestern, it sits up a little bit more. You definitely can see that in profile. As you can see, you could actually see the case back on here where it's sort of slim on here. It's actually very, very close to the case. Both of them have polished edges. The fit and finish and quality of both of them feel really good. There's really no difference between the two. I mean, I'm sure that the brushing on here might be a little less, perfect. Maybe even the polishing, but then again, I mean, it's $179. If you wanted to buy a Seiko right now, a Seiko Monster, and you were going to go get like an SRPD 2.5, you would spend around $400. You could probably get them on the secondary gray market for $400. I mean, they sell $525 new. That is with the Hardlex, the same movement. You do get Lumed, so Lumed is very good on Seiko, so we're going to do a Loom Shot. just to see the differences. But I know this is pretty killer in loom, so it's not really a fair comparison because obviously this is a fully loom dial. But let's do it, and then we will wrap up the video. Actually, before we do the Loom Shot, I almost forgot. Let's do a wrist check, and then I will throw both of these watches on my wrist. I actually started charging the watches. Today I am wearing the Glycine Combat Sub. This is a watch that was actually sent to me by Rock the Watch, and he said I can keep it. And this is a watch that I've kept in my collection. It was a gift from him. Just a really great guy. Check out his channel. He has a really great channel, doing some really great videos. He has some awesome watches, obviously. Some really cool watches, and he's like a real collector. He's been buying some amazing watches recently. So there you go. You know, I have a 7.5 inch wrist. This does wear a little bit thinner. Look at, you know, remember this, and then I'll show you the next the Seestern of my watch. You can see this does wear a little bit thinner than that Seestern because it is almost a 0.5 millimeter thinner. It's not, you know, incredibly thin, but it does make a difference when it's sitting on your wrist because that thickness is added to the back of the watch, not the actual case. So 7.5 inch wrist. This is a 42 millimeter watch, and you know the Monster always wears comfortable. It's a comfortable watch, and the dial. I have to say that Frost dial, if they made that currently and it was $525, there would be no reason to get any other watch because that dial is pretty incredible. And unfortunately, they don't do that. So you can see on my 7.5 inch wrist, this, see, it's when I have it in profile, you're not going to be able to see it as much, but you could see a little bit of the case back there. It does sit higher on my wrist, so there's actual space on this side of my, and you can't really see it on the camera, but it does sit slightly higher. It's not incredibly noticeable, but it is a little bit more noticeable. But again, for $179, this is an incredible deal. This watch was actually won by someone. I have to send it out. I have their address. I did a giveaway with this watch, so congratulations to the winner. You know who you are. You've already sent me your address and everything. But there you go. Like I said, I'm going to do a quick loom shot, and then we're going to wrap up the video. So I wouldn't complain about the loom on either of these watches. I think that they have excellent loom. Lumibrite is a great product from Seiko. You can see it's just bright. It actually lights up the entire dial. You have that pip. It just looks good. It almost looks like a fully loomed dial a little bit, like as if the dial has actually got some loom on it. Because it is so bright, it actually does light up the rest of the dial. Lumibrite is awesome. It really is. I have an SBDC073, and it always does well in my loom competitions. But obviously, this is a fully loomed dial in the Seestern, and that's something that you really can't beat. This is ridiculous. It doesn't pick up very well on the camera because it's so bright. You could barely see the hands, but in person you can see the hands. There's a black outline. And it's just sort of glowing in the camera, which just looks like a torch, and it is. It is very, very bright. The bezel is not loomed on either of them. You do get a loomed day and date on the Seestern, something that Seiko obviously don't do. So again, if you are in the market for a Seiko and you do not want to spend the extra money, the Seestern is definitely the way to go. Unfortunately, the SBDC073 is not available, so if you want the Frost Monster, you can't buy it, and that's why it's so much more expensive to go and buy one on the secondary market. But tell me what you guys think in the comments below. Tell me what you think of Seestern. Tell me what you think of the SBDC061. Don't forget to go over to Rock the Watch and subscribe to his channel. Great guy, great watches. Check out his channel. I put a link to his channel in the description, so check him out. Don't forget to like and subscribe here on Watch Chris. I very much appreciate it. Please follow me on Instagram. My Instagram is Watch Chris Blog. Anyway, thanks for logging on. I'll catch you guys in the next video.